everyone, this is Wobbly Wallaby, and today I'm going to look at what ancient equipment is good for physical Dorams who want to improve their damage. One of the difficulties of comparing gear is how complicated the Ragnarok mobile damage formulas are. The results will vary and it's heavily dependent on the target you're hitting and also your character itself. Ancient equipment also has random attributes, so it's important to explain the mechanics so people understand how things work in general, and as a result they can make better decisions based on their situation. If you look at the Lunatic Carrot Pound and the Savage Soul damage formulas from romhandbook.com, you can see how complicated it really is. A link to the website will be in the description. Here's a snippet of the Lunatic Carrot Pound code. You can see how important HP contributes to damage because of Life Soul. For non-PvP maps, it takes your current HP times 36% and then adds it to your max HP times 9%, divides it by 11.8, and then multiplies by 1. That amount is added to the damage formula. Whereas for attack percentage, it uses your attack minus your base attack, which comes from your dex, strength, and luck. You might get tempted by the attack percentage on ancient equipment or random attributes, but HP scales much better, which is why Dorams choose HP percentage over attack percentage. But HP isn't everything. I would also factor in ignore defense. You should try to aim for about 130% ignore defense or more. For tougher bosses you need even more than that, so you can rely on ignore defense gear and cards, the skill Meowgrass, or morale enchants. Then, to make it even more complicated, some ancient equipments have increased physical damage, penetration percentage, and size modifiers, all of which are highly dependent on your character and what the target is like. Personally, my style is always to increase damage as much as possible, which is why I use Hylian Bracelet and Dog Servant. Those both add a lot of physical damage increase. First, let's look at the ancient equipment armor. Before ancient equipment came out, the two armor I would see most frequently were God's Blessing and Lazy Meowcoat. For God's Blessing, Refine 10 for early to mid game players, and plus 15 Refine for late game. This armor provided a lot of HP and survivability. For Lazy Meowcoat, Refine 15 for late game. I rarely saw physical Dorams using Lazy Meowcoat unless it was plus 15. Next, I'll analyze 3 ancient equipment armors which I think are relevant towards Dorams. First is Dragon Skill Armor, which adds a lot of physical damage percentage increase. When comparing it with the old armor, the physical damage increase is unmatched. However, that comes with the downside of less survivability. It doesn't have as much HP percentage or specific elemental reductions as God's Blessings. Getting HP percentage enchants on various equipment is quite easy and it can add a lot of HP. What is harder is getting physical damage percentage increase, which is why Dragon Skill Armor is so good. Even if you got a terrible random attribute from Dragon Skill Armor, the fact that at plus 10 you get 14% physical damage increase is quite insane. For new players, I would choose Dragon Skill Armor because the more damage you can do, the easier it is for you to farm. Especially if you want your Lunatic Gunner to one-shot monsters as well, this is usually the limiting factor. The more Zenny you can get early on, the faster you can buy better gear to make your Doram stronger. You get one random attribute, and I put the 3 notable ones as well as the possible range. This was data mined from romhandbook.com. So for example, your random attribute for damage to large monsters might be 6%, 13%, or 20%. Which are the ideal random attributes? My personal opinion is to go all out on damage. The max HP percentage might be tempting, but I'd rather just use God's Blessing then. My number 1 choice would be damage dealt to large monsters. And then for number 2 it would be the physical damage increase. And here's the reason why. Unless you're lucky enough to have a lot of ignore defense through morale enchantments, you'll likely be using the Minora's Insight effect to achieve the recommended 130% ignore defense. In order to activate this, you'll need a large monster damage modifier such as the Gacha Abyssal Cry or the free-to-play plus 10 Glacier Power. Most Dorams I know have a plus 6 Abyssal Cry. That provides damage to large monsters plus 10% and plus 5% damage to bosses. Now, consider you rolled a plus 13% damage to large monsters on your Dragon Skill Armor. Now, you don't need the Abyssal Cry anymore because your armor handles the Insight effect. Instead, you can use a high refined White Knight Helm, and that way the minimum damage to boss monsters would already be at 10%, so on paper this already beats Abyssal Cry. Also, you could use gachas such as the +6 special moments. Basically, this frees up your headwear so you have more flexibility. Next, I'll now do a damage test for the Dragon Scale armor. First, here are my stats with my old gear. I have 963,000 HP. My penetration percentage is 45. My skill damage is at 20%. My damage percentage is 68.8%. My physical damage increase is at 59.1%. And my ignore defense is at 124.3%. My gear is Hylian Bracelet with the Aqua Element card. I have the God's Blessing with the Moonak Star card. I have the White Duke Manteau with the MVP card. I have the Elegant Doram shoe with the Ferris card. I had the Dog Servant with the Moonlight Tendrilin card. I have the Survival Ring with the Moonlight Tendrilin card. I have the Fine Pink Foxgrass with 2 Minoris cards. I have the +6 Abyssal Cry with the Andre Star card. I have the Winter Crown, Kraken Treasure Key, Love Goddess, and Panel Guardian. I am eating a Wind Converter, a Dex B, and Vitality B meal. I'm also eating 6 Satisfied Feasts. The target dummy is set to Dragon, Large, and Water. The dummy strength is 90%. I chose Dragon over something like Demi-Human because I have a lot less damage increase to dragons. This better simulates a boss hunting scenario where you just face a whole bunch of bosses with different races. Furthermore, I picked a 90% strength dummy as it better simulates a very tough boss. This dummy will have 4000 defense percentage of 100%, wind damage reduction of 90%, and long range damage reduction by 25%. With God's Blessings, my Savage Soul crit hits for 200,741 damage. Next, I use my +10 Dragon Scale armor with the physical damage +10% random attribute. I will also be using the Moonak Star card. My HP fell from 963,000 to 822,000. But I believe that trade-off is worth it since my physical damage increase went from 59.1% to 84.7%. Now, my crit hits for 224,419 damage, an increase of 11.2% over God's Blessings. But wait, what happens if you get a garbage random attribute? Well actually, it's still okay. I put a Moonak Star card into a no enchant and no refined Dragon Scale armor. The random attribute adds nothing to damage. My Savage Soul crit now hits for 203,023 damage, an increase of 1.1% damage from my God's Blessings. However, how about endgame Dorams? From the R.LUM community Discord channel, Bot404 had posted how a clean Dragon Scale armor with damage dealt to large monsters +20% could beat out his +15 Lazy Meow coat. He highlighted the peak damage for a 2-minute observation period. We can see that his Savage Soul damage with Dragon Scale beat his Lazy Meow coat, but not so for Lunatic Carrot Pound. His target dummy was at 90% strength, large, and water. He was using the Aqua card in his offhand, 2 Minoris cards for his weapon, and a Wind Converter. I find it insane how a clean Dragon Scale armor has the potential to beat out a +15 Lazy Meow coat, which costs more than 900 million zenny. He also shared the rest of his gear, which has all the endgame Doram equipment and gachas. A big thank you to Bot404 for showing the power of ancient equipments for endgame Dorams. Next is Voodoo Armor. Among my friends, I don't see any using Voodoo Armor for Doram. It's less popular, but it has potential. Here's how it compares with old armor. Without the random attribute, the physical attack +20% and the ignore defense is not enough. Attack percentage isn't something Dorams typically look for in gear due to how the damage formula works. If I look at the Lunatic Carrot Pound formula again, the attack percentage scales less than HP. As a result, Dorams' attack tend to be lower as we focus on HP. so attack percentage is a poor modifier. Even in the damage formula, it's one of the weakest modifier since it's based only on our base attack. So on paper, 20% attack really isn't that great in general for Dorams. However, the physical penetration plus 15% as a random attribute is amazing, and I would argue that is the only attribute you should be aiming for. The damage to large and max HP would not be as good as the Dragon Scale armor since the physical damage increase would outdamage the attack percentage. The biggest problem with Voodoo armor is if you don't get the physical penetration percentage, it is not good. At least with Dragon Scale, the physical damage increase percentage is guaranteed. On the R.LUM community Discord channel, I did see a Doram mention that the penetration plus 15% Voodoo armor did outdamage Dragon Scale. I don't doubt that since penetration percentage is amazing, however, it heavily depends on the target that you're hitting. The reason I wouldn't pick Voodoo armor is the chance to get physical penetration percentage isn't guaranteed, and even if you got it, the chance to get plus 15% isn't guaranteed. As a result, I wouldn't pick this as my Ancient Equipment armor due to the higher chance of this being bad. I'd rather take my chances with the Dragon Scale armor. Next is Ashen armor. This is quite comparable to God's Blessings, although you need to roll for the max HP percentage for it to come close. I see this as a free-to-play friendly God's Blessings. If you're opening a Punape Museum chest and see this and you don't have anything else better, I'd go for it. Otherwise, I'd rather choose Dragon Scale armor. For random attribute, the ideal one is the HP percentage. If you're gonna go for HP percentage, you should go all in on this. The other attributes don't help you with dealing damage. On paper, unless I roll a perfect 15% max HP percentage, I'd say this is strictly worse than God's Blessings. Next, here's my Ancient Equipment armor recommendations. The Dragon Scale armor with the damage to large monsters plus 20% is the best. Secondly, I'd go with the plus 15% penetration Voodoo armor. Thirdly, I'd go with the Dragon Scale armor with the physical damage plus 15%. In all cases, they should beat out the old God's Blessings and Lazy Meow Coat for the same refined level. They can also potentially beat out the plus 15 refined versions as well. If you want damage, all of these are excellent choices. Doram's really got a nice damage boost with Ancient Equipments. Next is Offhand. I'll analyze 4 Ancient Equipment Offhand items. First, if you have sufficient Ignore Defense, which is usually around 130% minimum, you should be using a damage dealing Offhand. For wand users, Eagle Flute is the important one to look at since it helps a lot with ranged weapons. For random attributes, the only one of interest is the physical damage plus 18%. If you're gonna go for damage, just go for damage. I wouldn't try to make a hybrid where I choose defensive properties. Eagle Flute is comparable to Helian's Bracelet. Note that for ranged damage, this is the same as physical damage increase for wand users, so I combined them together for easier comparison. If we compare the two, Eagle Flute needs the random attribute to be 12 or 18% to compete with Helian's Bracelet of the same refined level. The big advantage of Eagle Flute over Helian's Bracelet is the cost. Whereas Eagle Flute is much cheaper, especially if you're farming Comodo maps, you're already getting these materials that you need to help with refining and socketing. Its damage output may be lower depending on your random attribute, but if you don't have a Helian Bracelet already, buy this. Next, for the melee demon knife users who can get insane damage due to the chance to double final damage, the relevant offhand is the Dragonbone Shield. The Dragonbone Shield is good since it adds melee physical damage increase and its random attribute can add even more physical damage increase. Your weapon determines whether you're doing ranged damage or melee damage, so in the case of using a dagger, you're now affected by melee damage increasing modifiers and not range modifiers. Dagger Dorams use Skeleton Bracer because it has a 15% chance to deal double damage. This is chance based, so you need to start calculating your expected value. If I compare the two, if I get the 18% damage random attribute, it is strictly better than the Skeleton Bracer if the double damage does not occur. This is because the melee attack percentage is worse than the damage increase. My recommendation for Demon Knife Dorams is to stick with the Skeleton Bracer. The double damage chance is well worth it. I would switch to the Dragonbone Shield if I struggled to one-shot a weaker boss in the worst case scenario. That is, if no double damage occurred for the Demon Knife or Skeleton Bracer, and you didn't get a crit from your skill like Picky Pack. The consistency of increased damage is good, but that's more relevant for weaker bosses. If you're fighting a tougher boss, the double damage chance will be better for your overall DPS. Next, if you lack ignore defense against tough bosses or creatures, the Voodoo Blade is good. For Voodoo Blade, the random attribute of interest is ignore defense. I see this offhand as a utility item. If you know the target has high defense, then switch to this and go all in on ignore defense. Voodoo Blade is comparable to Rosa Chain. If I'm going all out on ignore defense, I want the random attribute to be 20 or 30% ignore defense, otherwise I just stick with Rosa Chain. Rosa Chain is cheaper than Hylian Bracelet, so in general I'd recommend people use a Rosa Chain if they're lacking ignore defense. Zenny-wise, I'd rather buy a Rosa Chain and try to get a better random attribute on an Eagle Flute instead. The last offhand is the Heroic Monument. For Heroic Monument, the random attribute of interest is HP percentage. If you're gonna go for HP percentage, you should go all in instead of the survivability options. One great thing about this ancient equipment is the HP percentage increase is quite unique compared to the existing offhands that Dorams could use. The closest HP percentage increasing offhand I could find was the Meteorite Buckler. If I compare the Meteorite Buckler and the Heroic Monument in the context of Sharkfellow damage only, then it's a closer comparison. Sharkfellow relies on higher HP to deal more damage, so Heroic Monument is great for that. Even without the HP percentage random attribute, Heroic Monument is still really good. Once you get the HP percentage random attribute, it'll beat anything else out there for HP percentage for offhand. I hope this guide helped you understand the ancient equipment and what to choose for physical Dorams. I think ancient equipment can help Dorams become much stronger than before, and I'm really glad that the developers added it into the game. If you enjoyed this video, like, comment, and subscribe.